Gentlemen, this video serves as an introduction to realism. I would like you to take note on this video as you watch, and then head over to Edline, and there is a link to a Google form that I would like you to fill out upon completion of this. So what is American realism? Simply, it is a response to Romanticism. Whereas Romanticism was stories that favored the imagination, the idealistic, kind of these fantasy stories, realism, naturally, are stories about life and everyday life. This faithful representation of reality in literature is known as verisimilitude. That's a big word, but really all it means is that when we read this literature, it looks like our life. We can't read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and find any bearing to reality in there, right? This headless horseman and all of that. Verisimilitude means, yes, this looks like our life. If Sleepy Hollow stopped, if it didn't have the headless horseman part in it, it was just a story of Crane and Brom Bones in love with Tassel and duking it out, then sure, maybe that would be realistic. In realism, there's a focus on the characters over the plot. So over our next couple of weeks, as we're talking about realism, we are not going to discuss the plot triangle as much. We're going to talk about the characters and how the characters grow and develop. The language. It is written in the natural vernacular or dialect. So this idea that it is written how we speak. Think of the difference between formal writing and informal writing, and that's the same thing here. And then it's prominent right up until 1890-ish, although that's a fluid term. No one in 1890 said this is the end of the realism period. So why did realism develop? Well, let's look first at the Civil War. Prior to the Civil War, the Revolutionary War had happened long ago enough that people kind of forgot it and romanticized the struggle and didn't think so much of the horror and the loss. But with the Civil War happening, everyone was confronted with the gruesome realities of life, losing sons and cousins to battle. Battles that took hundreds of thousands of lives, right? So the grim reality of the Civil War, cities are becoming bigger and more industrial as the Industrial Revolution takes place. Cities are filled with factories, and if you can just let your mind imagine all the smog and the smoke and the dust, and cities aren't this pretty place. The harsh reality of frontier life. So in Romanticism, the idea was the frontier is this great place of unexplored dreams and never-ending opportunity. Anything could happen in the frontier. Now that we're 20, 30 years later, the frontier is still appealing, but the conversation is, hey, life is hard in the frontier. It is not easy to raise a family and subsist in the frontier. This is not an easy task. We also have an emerging middle class, which I think is really important, and this middle class can read and participates actively in politics. So Romanticism, early 1800s, most of the people who had time to read for pleasure were of the upper class. They were educated. And so for Romanticism, they did not pardon me. They did not mind seeing the harsh realities of life. They didn't need to see that because they didn't have any harsh realities. So the stories could be fantastic. But now that we have this emerging middle class, they're saying, wait, this doesn't look like my life. This isn't me. I want to see stories that remind me of me and the struggles that I go through on a daily basis. So I said it's about character. We have ordinary characters in real life situations. None of this hero stuff. None of these non-believable characters. And the choices of these characters are kind of the focus on this story. How do the characters respond to these conflicts? And then let's be clear on this last one. Characters appear in their real complexity of temperament and motive. They are in reasonable relation to nature, to each other, to their social class, to their own past. So these characters are fully developed. They have warts, zits, and all, right? They're not just this idealized utopian character. Here's just a few of the writers. We're going to read Twain next week, and then again in the fourth quarter with The Adventures of Huck Finn. Coming off of realism, we also have a smaller movement called regionalism. This is where the writers are writing in a realistic way, but writing in a realistic way that is specific to where they live. So they are focusing on creating characters that reflect the culture, the dialect, the systems, the beliefs of that region. So if you can imagine a story written in the South, right, is going to be much different than a story written by someone in California, off in the frontier, or someone who wrote a story in Boston. That's the idea of regionalism. This idea that there is not one true American experience really became crystal clear here. The American experience is created with this cacophony of voices, this diversity of experiences from the South, North, East, West, Midwest. To think about regionalism, if I asked you to write a short story using regionalism, using local color, and you were writing obviously about someone from Cincinnati, you'd make reference to Skyline, maybe, you'd make reference to the Bengals, right? You're going to bring in those things that are familiar to the region. So realism then spurned regionalism. Hey, look, it's not enough just to write about daily life, but let's reflect what daily life actually is in different areas of the country. Next, we come to naturalism. So if we divide realism into two camps, we've got the writers who depict life in a realistic fashion but are inherently optimistic. Then we have those that are pessimistic, and generally those are your naturalism writers. They look at life as man versus nature, and nature can be good and bad, and how will man survive against nature? There's a lot of emphasis on Darwin and Freud here. Darwin is this idea of natural selection, right? Survival of the fittest. Are we as men, as a collective and as individuals, are we strong enough to survive these challenges posed to us by life and by nature? There's this question, there's this debate that began and actually still goes on to this day. Are we governed by our heredity or by our environment? You may have heard of it as nature versus nurture. Are we who we are because of the genes, the genetic makeup that's passed down to us by generations? Or are we who we are because of our experiences and how we are raised by our family, etc.? So this is man in conflict with some greater force. What we saw here is usually the characters come from a lower class. They're either criminals or they're fallen out. And we have this theme of survival and determinism. So we've got these people who are put against a challenge. And the ultimate question in this story is, can they survive this challenge? Do they have the genetic makeup to survive? Do they have the strength of will to survive? If they don't, why? Is it because of their genetic makeup, or are they weak-minded individuals? We see naturalism stories being a little bit more violent because naturally some of the characters fail in their quest, and it's not a happy ending. So, again, if you're thinking about naturalism, man versus a bigger force, can man beat this bigger force? And we'll see naturalism when we read To Build a Fire by Jack London. So one of the reasons that naturalism came in was the development of Freud and Darwin got people thinking, and it was applied to fiction. But then also this idea that life still was not easy, right? We're in the 1880s now. The Civil War is over, so we're not sending our sons or our brothers or cousins to die. But we have immigrants all over. So we have cities that are filled with more of a lower class. There's increasing poverty everywhere. People are pushing for jobs, but there's not enough for everyone. And then, frankly, Reconstruction was not happening as it should have, and there was still much destruction in cities and societies trying to rebound from the Civil War. So life still, after the Civil War, 15, 20 years after the Civil War, was not back to normal. And so how does man overcome these conflicts? So a couple important things to remember as we finish up here. First, realism kind of started this all. Regionalism and naturalism are kind of branches of realism. This realism is the first truly American mode of writing, because Romanticism actually came from England. There was the British Romanticism movement, which then spurned the American Romanticism movement. But realism was this first sense of writing in America that is an American type of writing and an American experience. So what you'll see as we read on is that many refer back to realism as that true moment when American literature began to take form. All right, so guys, I hope you took notes on this. Watch it again if you need to. We'll discuss in class tomorrow. Head back to the Edline page and fill out that Google form. Thank you.